Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we will review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Pesachim, Daf Chavtet through Lamed Hey, 29 through 35. 29. Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana haya oseh Yom HaKippurim kishabat l'tashtumim. In the viewpoint of Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, the halachic principle of kom le b'derab minei, that we will apply only the more severe punishment or penalty in a scenario where someone incurred multiple penalties with the same action, that concept will be applied to Yom Kippur just as it is applied to Shabbat. Ma Shabbat nachayav b'nafsho patur min hatashtumim. Just as on Shabbat, if you commit a crime, a malacha, you do a Sabbath violation which leads to capital punishment, and yet simultaneously it also would have incurred a financial penalty, you only get the capital punishment and do not have to pay the financial penalty. Af Yom Kippurim, so too when it comes to Yom Kippur, b'nchayav b'nafsho, you'll be liable for your life, and not in the sense of a death penalty, but of karet, of spiritual excision, and you'll be exempt from tashlumim, from the financial penalty. What's an example of a scenario where this could happen? Rashi explains, Hamadlik Gadish. If you were to light someone else's haystack on fire, that's a malacha, both on Shabbat and on Yom Kippur, for which there would be either mitat beidin, execution in the Shabbat case, or karet in the Yom Kippur case, and theoretically would have been a financial penalty. You have to pay for the guy's Gadish. Well, you're not going to have to pay. Daf Lamed, 30. Amar Rav, Kedroba Pesach Yishaveru, earthenware vessels in which chametz was cooked, must be destroyed, must be broken before Pesach. Shmuel Amar, Lo Yishaveru. Shmuel says you don't have to destroy them, but rather you can save them for after Passover, and then after Passover you can cook in them, whether like foods or dissimilar foods. Mino she'eno mino. Shmuel once found himself in a situation where he was yelling at and chastising the pottery makers because they were raising their prices. They were jacking up their prices in the aftermath of Pesach, taking advantage of the fact that the people had destroyed their pottery and they wanted to make a big profit off of it. And Shmuel said, no, you better charge ordinary prices, and if you don't, I will announce that the ruling, the halacha, is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon, who takes a more relaxed perspective on chametz she'avar lava Pesach, on post-Pesach chametz. You could ask a question, but if Shmuel really held that Rabbi Shimon was correct, then why didn't he just announce it? And the answer was that Shmuel did not want to disagree with Rav on Rav's turf, that he happened to be located at that time in a region of the country where Rav was the major posek. Daf Lamed Aleph, 31. Minayin l'noshe b'chavero, maneh, b'chavero b'chavero, shmotzim ezev nitnin lezeh. How do you know that if one person lends to another person, and then the second person lends to a third person, that the first person can extract the money from the third person and need not use the second person as a go-between? That A lends money to B and B lends money to C, that A can charge C the money. How do we know this? Rabbi Natan says, Talmud lomar, v'natan la'asher hasham lo, you shall give to the one to whom you owe. And since there is a direct line from person C to person A can demand the money. Daf Lamed Bet, 32. Tanu Rabbanan. If you are a non-Kohen, if you are Yisrael, and you eat Truma, which you're not allowed to do, you have an obligation to pay Keren v'chomesh, to pay the principal and a fifth penalty, a chomesh, to the Kohen. Well, what's the minimum amount of Truma that must be consumed in order for this penalty of the chomesh to kick in? So one school of thought says it has to be that you ate a kazayit worth, an olive's bulk. Abba Shaul, however, said, ad shebo sheva pruta, until you eat an amount that is worth a pruta. Now you could ask an interesting question. So what's the scenario whereby something might be worth a pruta, but didn't yet have an olive's bulk in it? That seems to be an unusual scenario. And Rashi explains, if there's a drought, if there's a time of famine, then even an infinitesimal amount of food might be worth a pruta, and that a kazayit might be worth multiple prutot. So that's a scenario whereby something might be a pruta but not a kazayit. Daf Lamed Gimel, 33. Madlikin bepatu v'shemen shel truma shnitmet. If you have truma which became impure, you cannot eat it anymore. It must be burned. But in burning it, you're allowed to use it as fuel to your advantage. You're allowed to have benefit from it. So here the Gemara says you're allowed to use bread or oil of impure truma as fuel for a fire. So the Gemara then says, Lo shanu lapat, it's only true regarding bread. Avachiti, but as for raw wheat kernels, lo, you're not allowed to do this. Shemivote takal, because maybe it'll lead to a problem, a blunder. Someone will make a mistake in that if you put wheat kernels into a fire, they don't necessarily get destroyed. They might just be crispy and toasted and actually be tasty food afterwards, and someone might eat it, not realizing that it's forbidden truma. Lamed Daled, 34. Lul katan haya ben keves lamizbech ma'aravo shel keves. That there was a small gap in between the outer altar in the Beit HaMikdash, the outer altar, which is in the courtyard, and the ramp, the keves, which was on the south side of the Mizbeach. And this was ma'aravo shel keves, on the western side of the ramp. There was a slight space. What was the purpose of this slight space? Well, shesham hayu zorkin psulei chatat ha'of. There they would throw the invalidated bird offerings, sin offerings, korban chatat ha'of, betubar tzuratan, and it would stay there overnight. It would experience what we call lina, and become totally invalidated. And then we'd be taken out of the temple complex for burning. Why was it not just burned right away? Why did it have to stay there in that lul until it was passing the night? The answer is because of bizyon karashim. As Rashi explains, we wouldn't want to have a situation where valid korbanot are burned right away in the mizbeach, but invalid korbanot are taken also and burned. But rather, some time passes to indicate the difference between valid kodshim and invalid kodshim. Lamed Hey, 35. Isa shani losha bayayin v'shemen udvash. Ein chayvin al chimutza karet. If you take dough and you knead the dough with wine, with oil, or with honey, you are not going to be liable for the law of Pesach, of chametz, and be subject to the punishment of karet on account of that dough. Why? Because it was made with beverages that are not water, that are other kinds of beverages. Mishum dahavlu mei perot, it's considered juices. And juices do not cause fermentation in the halachic sense. And the example we have in modern times is what we call colloquially egg matzah, which is actually sometimes not even egg matzah, it's actually grape juice matzah, that it is considered not to be eaten by Ashkenazim by our tradition, but is not really chametz, is technically speaking kosher for Pesach, despite our practice of not eating it. Everyone have a great week.